his phone. Who are you?
Lay flat on the floor immediately.
What the hell are you talking about?
Fall down now. 2 seconds.
In my eyes, Previs is the building block of the filmmaking process. They can come from any sort of process, either a virtual camera system or just sitting behind a computer, animating or taking storyboards and modeling off of the storyboards and composing your shots based off that, in which you drive the creative and the story of a film, as well as figuring out all technical implications and any other budgetary things that come into play. So you can figure it out up front, and in the end, you save a lot of money.
Define with the director and the producers what are the critical sequences to previs first. Some of them are critical because you're trying to plan how you're going to shoot it. Some of them are critical because you want to get to a budget quickly and you need to give the people who are bidding the show previs so they really can understand what you're trying to do. And sometimes you rush stuff ahead of other stuff because you want to sell it to the studio. And you use previs to sell a sequence or the whole movie to a studio.
Primary responsibilities is to help the director's vision come to life by taking the script, the comments from the director, the director's vision, and input from the different blessed department heads on the show, and create moving pictures, basically.
Previs to me, it's really exploration of story, and a lot of times you look at previs companies and the work that they do, and they show, here's what our previs looks like, and here's the film, and it almost looks exactly the same. Where I think the strength in previs is everything before that we can really quickly iterate through whatever it is, and say, well, it's not about getting down to the final decision as much as these are bad decisions. You can do it 100 times, 100 different ways, but we can define for you the 80 ways that you probably shouldn't do it because it's not the strongest way to do it. So in a way, it's almost like sculpting, and it doesn't cost as much as sitting on set, burning film and having all these people there, and you can just explore story.
Previs is all about collaboration. We think of ourselves as a hub in the production process, much like the old studio system. The old studio system, everything was on the lot, from costumes to props to sets, and all the people that you needed to make a film were all on the lot, ready to go. Today, all those people are freelancers that come in from different places, and they work on many different shows at different studios all the time. So we find that previs is a good way for everybody to get their ideas into a single pot.
And another strength I think of previs is the fact that you're in a studio system where someone's got to approve the money, and a lot of times if the previs is there, it's there to back up the idea, so you could be there and you could say, hey, we can do this sequence in $1 million, but then there's this shot that's really expensive, but you can see it in context as previs, and you can sit there at a table with a bunch of executives and they can make the call and say, well, you know what, the shot's worth it, because it's a big part of the story.
We can look at a previs and dissect it and break it down, because we can give them any level of detail. We can show them the computer files, we can break down how many feet a camera's moving, we can break down the distance to your subject, the height off the ground, what lens is being used. There's a lot there that you can actually use to create a final image that is going to be extremely accurate to what the final product is going to be. So you don't end up coming up with ideas that just simply cannot be shot.
Well, you work on the previs, you bring it along with the director, and at a certain point you lock it down, you say, okay, this is what the sequence is, and then of course you have to shoot the movie. Sometimes the sequence winds up very much like the previs, and sometimes it doesn't.
Some directors are really involved with the process. They want to be there on the right behind you on the computer, or if we have a virtual camera system, which is it's basically a handheld screen which is driven by motion capture, in which you get real-time feedback of your environment with lens accuracy and everything. Some directors want to shoot with that. I was on Avatar for 4 years as well, and being on Avatar, Jim Cameron, he wanted full control of all of it. Other directors, like some commercial directors, you won't even see them. We'll work directly with the visual effects supervisor just to get the visual effects down. So when it goes to the visual effects studio, they know how much it's going to cost them in the end. They know what lens they're going to use. They know what motion control system they're going to have to use, and we provide the motion data if we need to. So it ranges. It's such a big range. As you can kind of see, you take these, all of this stuff, and this is a pre-built scene basically in the 3D world, and we can manipulate it and do whatever we want to with it. So, basically, as you have your characters, you want to adjust them in timing. If at any given time we have an operator on the stage, we can tell them, I want a platform, and be on a train moving 200 miles per hour. So we'll get the background moving and everything for free, and then we just shoot on the train as we're going, So it's a great tool. And then, the best part about it is it's real time. So, let's say we're capturing and I say hit record, and I'm getting a shot right now. We have our play controls basically lined up here, one rows of buttons that we sort of pre-programmed. So, if you just find your spot, there's a bad guy, and we go in. It's really such a new technology. There's not a lot of people using it. It's sort of birthed out of Avatar, and it's starting to catch on. It's just a really fast way to make movies. This is basically solving everything from the cameras and taking all the data from the cameras, and this is the program that basically envelopes all of that data. And what this program then does is it outputs the motion in a way that Motion Builder can understand it. And so in turn, it's basically like all of this is communicating routed through this way and then back to here. So it's camera to OptiTrack to Motion Builder to camera back to Motion Builder.
Here at Halon, all of our supervisors edit their own sequences. We don't have editors employed or on staff. I am a big proponent of this technique because I feel that understanding how shots to go together make for a more efficient sequence supervisor. Also, it's a great way to understand what revisions need to be made, how things are or are not working, and having a global understanding of how the editorial process works really impacts dramatically your understanding of how to design shots.
Stop firing!
We're looking at now films that take 2-3 years to make. They're really expensive. They get to the houses like ILM and Weta, and they take them, 6 months, a year to come back. Yeah. And meanwhile, as a director, you're cutting this film, and you need to make sense of it editorially. The sound guy needs to make sense of it editorially so they can do stuff. And, Previs is there to cut in, and that's what we call post-is here, where you have your plates that you shoot, right? Where they've got, for example, it's a guy running around in a green environment, and there's supposed to be all sorts of stuff there, monsters, all that stuff, but it takes like 6 months to a year to come back from the post house, where post is great, is we can do that real quickly in a day or two. It's not going to look final, but it'll be there, and the context is there, and the story is there.
kinds of previs. For the bear fight in Golden Compass, our previs was really what you would call previs, we called final animation. And that was because we had to have the little girl riding the bear. And we had to build a motion rig that she would ride on that would move like the bear was walking or running. So we animated it to a final level as previs. So the bear was fully rigged, and in the meantime we were building the mechanical part of it. And we exported those motion files to the motion control equipment that controlled the camera and the rig, put the girl on the rig, shot her on that rig, and then of course did on-stage composites very quickly to double check, make sure it was all working fine, which it was.
We build a real-time virtual studio system called Prevision, and it's made to do real-time keying, tracking, rendering, and compositing of CGI and live-action scenes all together while on a soundstage. Generally, what happens is that people who have been shooting visual effects work are frequently, it's difficult because you're staring at a huge field of green, and one person will have one picture in their mind, another person will have a different picture, and you don't find out that everybody was thinking something different until 4 weeks later when it's too late, right? This way, everybody gets to see the same image at the same time, and the creative decisions get, controlled by the director of photography and the director on stage. So for tracking, we have a combination of tracking technologies. We have a little InterSense camera here. It's an optical tracking that looks up, and as soon as we can see 4 targets at once, we can lock to them. And that way we can figure out exactly where we are in space. So we also found we needed much more angular accuracy, because it turns out that, similar to the Steadicam principles, very small amounts of angular deviation show up as a very big change in the background. So we built a very high accuracy gyro called the AirTrack. And so we take that data between this camera and the AirTrack, the position and the rotation, fuse them together, and that's what lets us know exactly where we are anywhere on the soundstage. The next step in the shot is to get a good key. So as you can see, we're getting a very good quality high definition key that we're keying the full 1920 by 1080 HD resolution real time, and we can do it very, very quickly. The Prevision system is where everything comes together. We have a breakout box module that brings in a number of the signals and does some signal processing, and then the video and the data, etc., all go into Prevision. And Prevision, it's a software hardware system that combines the real-time keying, tracking, rendering, compositing, etc. And essentially, what you're looking at is a visual effects pipeline running in real time. And so all the basic things that you have in traditional visual effects, there's essentially a panel here for each one of them. One of the interesting things about it is we found to really solve the CGI problem, live action match, is we had to do very accurate lens distortion. So you'll see that the buildings at the edge bow outwards slightly. And that's because they're experiencing barrel distortion to match the lens. As we zoom in, the buildings will straighten out. And then as I zoom in further, they will exhibit pincushion distortion. And all these are basic behaviors of zoom lenses as they're going through their range of motion. And all these are derived from our real-world lens calibration system. Well, what's especially interesting is being able to see that real-time composite on the stage means that you can match the lighting very, very well. And the biggest problem, or one of the key difficulties in visual effects, is making sure the lighting of the foreground and the background match. And if you don't have a reference there, it's very, very difficult. You'll have the light pointing the wrong way, or it'll be the wrong color, etc. When you've got a real-time image, then the lighting can be matched extremely quickly. The business is in 2 areas. One is in the more on-set pre-visualization area and data recording, which is more the higher cost episodic and the feature film area, where they're using the system to provide an on-set preview, recording all the data, and using that to accelerate their post-production process. And one of the things that's happening is that traditionally there's been very separate areas. You'd have pre-visualization, you have on-set, and you have post-production. And what frequently happens is people make the movie 3 times, and sometimes the assets don't transfer over. What we're working very hard to do is to make it a more seamless flow. So you take the assets you create in the previsualization world, we can load them into Prevision, shoot with them on stage so you have real-time reference. If you planned a shot, you know exactly where everything is. That tracking data then goes and flows through to post-production. And that way you don't have, redundant effort. The complexity of what's happening now in the motion pictures is that all these complicated worlds that have been separate up till now, motion capture and visual effects and the camera team and this, that, and the other, and backgrounds, have all operated in slightly isolated worlds because they weren't all working at the same time. You'd have camera was shooting, backgrounds would be built before, etc., and every group had a very defined area. What's happening now is that all the technologies are being put together at the same time. You have motion capture on stage. You have robotic camera systems that are controlling the stereoscopic controls of that. You have multiple very complicated cameras operating around. You have visual effects teams. And you have to keep track of all that. And so what we build is a system where all the data flow can come together. And so instead of having to look at a lot of separate data flows and hope they all come together, you just look at the image. And that way you see where you're at. And that ends up being, I think, for a visual world, the best way to look at something is by making an image.
DBs that don't like previs, but I think I think that's a valid concern sometimes, because if you have the wrong, it's a personality matchup at the same time, because you don't want to be the previs guy that tries to make their own movie, we're not directing this movie.
My first things I want to do is meet the DP and let him know that I'm there for him. And I want to let him know that, I'm not there to take his job because he's there, he's there for a reason. And I'm not there to make any falls. So that's just the first thing I want to do with him. And I want to provide the DP with everything he needs. So when he gets out there with the camera, he knows exactly where to put it and do whatever he wants. And if he wants to get creative out there as a director, then that's great. All more power to him. But that's definitely never we would want to take anything away from the DP. But I have seen some DPs where they get a little precautious because they don't really understand the process that much of what we do.
A lot of the times when I start a film, there's just nobody hired. It'll be just me and the producers and the directors, or the director. So there's really no DP to even talk to.
One of the best things about previs is, and this is the one thing that DPs are starting to learn now, is DPs at first were a little frightened by it because they were seeing it as telling them what they had to do. Yeah. But instead what the previs is telling them is, this is really how the director wants, this is shorthand for the director telling the DP how he wants the sequence to play. And within that, if you approach filmmaking like you would approach playing jazz, there is a structure to the music that you don't mess around with. But you can improvise over the top of that like crazy. And that's what previs is great for. It's great for establishing the structure and the flow of a scene. And then you can come back when you're shooting the movie and you can improvise on that structure. That it is so difficult to figure that out on the fly, on the set, that you'd better know ahead of time what it is you need to do.
There's a lot of directors that, already have their boards, and so it's really a close relationship where it's like, here's the sequence and you work with them, to kind of sculpt what that sequence is, so it's a talk with the director and what his views are, and you kind of just get like a mental download of what they're thinking of.
at times gets a bad rap because people say that it's creating sort of lazy filmmaking. It's like you can have everything you want, and so you want everything, and so you put everything in. But it can also have the reverse impact on that as well. You start to see that things are too crazy, or things are not, the timing's not right or whatever. And so it gives you the opportunity to start solving a lot of these problems before you go out and shoot. So I think it does create a bit of a different aesthetic, because you can do anything your mind can come up with today. But I think that probably would have happened anyway with visual effects.
As soon as you start to manipulate the camera in ways that diverge from common film language, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you are toying with how the shot will resonate with the audience, because it will have, if it is truly a fabricated move, it will have a sense of unreality to it.
Sometimes I find that if people try to follow the previs so specifically that they're not allowing themselves to be inspired by what's happening on the set on the day, then they're not using all the tools available to them. There really is no segmentation between pre-production, production, post-production. On a lot of big films, those three concepts have been condensed into one. A visual effects supervisor will start very early on in the process now, and they'll keep the DP on all the way through to the end of the show now, because it's important that everybody's voice is heard throughout that process. Digital tools, pre-visualization, post-production, all these different things are sort of being done all simultaneously now. All these different things are overlapping now, and with the ability to shoot digitally and do rough compositions right on the set, the idea that production needs to be segmented into these different things is kind of going away. You're finding that there really is only one thing now, and that's production.